If you won't agree to retire, I'll have to terminate you, the young manager shouted at the elderly electrician's face. The old man silently removed his gloves, left his locker key on the table, and walked away without saying a word. But 14 days later, when the city's entire central power system failed, the mayor himself knelt before the man's doorstep, hands trembling as he held out a worn, yellowed blueprint. What happened, and why did an entire city suddenly need the very man they had cast aside? Welcome to QH, let's uncover what really happened. Walter Kent was 64 years old, an electrician who had served the city of Briarfield for 3 decades without taking a single sick day. His weathered hands bore the scars of countless repairs, each mark telling a story of power restored during storms, holidays, and emergencies. To the city's infrastructure, Walter was as essential as the copper wires running beneath the streets. His most remarkable quality wasn't his technical skill, though that was considerable. It was his memory. Walter carried the entire underground grid map in his mind, every junction box, transformer, and connection point from an era before digital blueprints. He could close his eyes and visualize precisely where lines intersected beneath any intersection in the city. Like having Google Maps in my head. But for electricity, he joked to the younger workers. Walter approached each task with methodical precision. His service record showed not a single major error in 30 years. When storms knocked out power, his instincts led repair crews directly to damaged sections without wasting precious hours. During the infamous blizzard of 2011, he had worked 48 hours straight, keeping the hospital grid functioning while the rest of the region went dark. But Walter had one significant flaw in the modern workplace. He was slow with technology. His large fingers fumbled with touch screens. He preferred paper logs to digital entries. The younger technicians respected his knowledge but snickered when he struggled to navigate the department's new tablet system. The change began when the city hired Darren Fox, a 32-year-old efficiency expert with an MBA and zero field experience, to modernize the utilities department. Sporting designer eyeglasses and always carrying the latest smartphone, Darren brought a corporate mindset to municipal services. Our goal is a smart grid for a smart city, he announced during his first staff meeting. No more paper, no more guesswork, no more old-school methods. Walter tried to adapt. He attended the mandatory training sessions, squinting at screens and taking handwritten notes while everyone else tapped away on keyboards. But the new protocols demanded speed that his careful approach couldn't match. 3 months after Darren's arrival, Walter was called into the glass-walled office, overlooking the maintenance yard. Your performance metrics are below acceptable standards, Darren said without looking up from his computer. You're taking twice as long to input data as the rest of the team. The actual repairs are done faster, Walter pointed out. I just write slower. That's not how we measure efficiency anymore. Darren finally looked up. The city is investing millions in a smart grid. We need people who can work with AI systems, not analog dinosaurs. Walter nodded slowly. I can learn. I've adapted to dozens of changes over 30 years. That's just it, Darren sighed with theatrical patience. Your time has passed. I need people who are updated, not living museum pieces. The exchange might have remained private, but Darren had left his office door open. A dozen workers heard every word. Walter saw them pretending not to listen, their eyes carefully avoiding his as he exited the office. The next morning during the team briefing, Darren assigned a major substation repair to a technician with just 2 years' experience, bypassing Walter entirely. Shouldn't Walter handle Grand Street? Someone asked. He rewired that station himself back in. We're implementing new protocols, Darren replied, dismissively. This isn't 2002 anymore. Walter stood silently, his weathered face betraying nothing. When Darren finished the assignments and the team dispersed, Walter remained behind. I need people who understand modern systems, Darren said, anticipating Walter's complaint. If you won't voluntarily retire, I'll have to make some difficult decisions about your continued employment. The maintenance yard fell silent. Everyone watched as Walter slowly removed his work gloves, carefully folded them, and placed them on the dispatch desk. Without a word, he unclipped his ID badge, removed his locker key, and set them both beside the gloves. Then, with dignity and tact, he walked across the concrete floor toward the exit. No dramatic speech, no angry outburst, just the steady footsteps of a man who had measured his worth in work well done, not in words. He was good in his day, a young electrician whispered as the door closed behind Walter. But it's the age of smart technology now. Darren quickly filled the vacancy with a recent technical college graduate. In an internal newsletter published the following week, he was quoted saying, "We're rejuvenating our workforce to align with Briarfield's vision of becoming a model smart city." Sometimes that means making difficult personnel changes. Within days, Walter Kent's 3 decades of service had been reduced to a nameplate removed from a locker, an empty space in the employee parking lot, and a folder marked archived in the Human Resources database. Walter retreated to his modest home on the outskirts of Briarfield, a small bungalow with a workshop in the backyard. Unlike his former colleagues who stayed connected through social media and smartphones, Walter had always been a private person. Without work, his isolation deepened. His landline rarely rang. He declined the few invitations he received to retirement gatherings. Instead, he filled his days with the books and manuals he'd collected over decades. Electrical codes from different eras, handwritten notes on specific repairs, diagrams he'd sketched of unique solutions to unusual problems. Sometimes he would spread them across his kitchen table, tracing the evolution of the city's power grid as it had grown and changed during his tenure. One afternoon, while Walter was pruning rose bushes in his front yard, a 10-year-old boy from next door approached the fence. "My dad says you used to fix electricity for the whole city," the boy said, balancing his skateboard against his leg. "Is that true?" Walter smiled, wiping soil from his hands. "I helped keep the lights on for a while, yes. Did you do anything important, like something that would be in the news?" Walter considered this, then replied, "I kept the power running through 3 consecutive hurricane seasons, 37 straight days once, when the coastal substations were underwater." The boy looked skeptical. "I Googled you, but nothing came up." "Not everything important makes it onto Google," Walter said gently. The boy shrugged, clearly unimpressed by accomplishments that hadn't been digitally recorded, and skated away. This exchange lingered with Walter longer than it should have. That evening he found himself searching his own name online. The results were sparse. A mention in a city newsletter from 2004, when he'd received an employee commendation. A photo from a public works department picnic, and nothing that captured 30 years of pre-dawn callouts, holiday emergencies, or the intricate knowledge he'd accumulated. Meanwhile, Briarfield was moving forward with its transformation into a model smart city. The centerpiece was a new power management system, a state-of-the-art control center, where artificial intelligence monitored energy flow, predicted usage patterns, and automatically rerouted power during outage. The mayor cut a ribbon at the grand opening, praising the system's efficiency and relegating the old manual processes to the past. What no one mentioned was how the new system interfaced with the city's aging infrastructure. Briarfield, like many American cities, had power lines and connections dating back to the 1950s, with modifications and additions from every decade since. The digital maps incorporated into the AI system were based on official blueprints, but they missed thousands of manual adaptations, temporary fixes that had become permanent, and undocumented workarounds that kept the system functioning. Within days of the new system's launch, minor problems began to surface. Lights flickered in the downtown district. The traffic signals at 4 major intersections went dark for 20 minutes during rush hour. The hospital reported voltage fluctuations that triggered their backup generator. The new technical team worked frantically to identify the causes, but the AI system couldn't reconcile what it was seeing in the power flow with what its digital blueprint said should be there. "It's like we have ghost connections," one frustrated engineer explained to Darren. "The system is detecting power routes that don't exist in our schematics." "That's impossible," Darren insisted. "The digital maps are compiled from the official city blueprints. The official blueprints don't include 30 years of field modifications," the engineer replied. "About 20% of our grid has been manually adapted over time. The AI can't read what was never documented. So find someone who knows where these modifications are," Darren demanded. The engineer exchanged glances with her colleagues. "We had someone, Walter." Darren dismissed this suggestion immediately. "We're not going backward. Find another solution." As technicians scrambled to reconcile the digital and physical realities of Briarfield's power grid, the city's aging mayor, Elijah Langston, grew increasingly concerned. Unlike Darren, Mayor Langston had been in office long enough to remember the reliability of the old system and the man who had kept it running. "Do we still have the original paper blueprints?" he asked during an emergency meeting. "The ones with the handwritten notes?" The room fell silent. Walter had them, someone finally admitted. He was the last one who maintained the paper records. "We don't know if they were preserved after the transition to digital." The mayor rubbed his temples. "So our multi-million-dollar smart system can't talk to our actual power grid. We have no accurate maps of what's really under our streets, and we've pushed out the one person who carried that map in his head." No one answered. The implications were clear and alarming. With hurricane season approaching and the system already showing vulnerabilities, Briarfield was facing a potential crisis that no amount of advanced technology could solve without the human knowledge they had discarded. Nobody remembered his name, but he was once the man who kept the lights on through 3 hurricane seasons. If you believe there are heroes without bronze statues, type invisible. The storm hit on a Thursday evening in October, earlier in the season, and stronger than forecasters had predicted. What began as heavy rain quickly evolved into gale force winds that toppled trees across Briarfield. By 7:30 p.m., the first transformer exploded on the north side. By 8:15, half the city was dark. In the gleaming new control center, technicians stared helplessly at screens showing cascading failures across the grid. The AI system, overwhelmed by conflicting data, began shutting down entire sections to prevent further damage. Emergency protocols that should have isolated the hospital and critical infrastructure failed to engage properly. Mayor Langston stood behind the lead engineer, watching as the digital map of Briarfield transformed from reassuring green to alarming red, sector by sector. The substation on Grant Street is the key, the engineer explained, sweat beading on her forehead despite the room's climate control. If we can restore that, we can stabilize enough power to run emergency services. So fix it, Darren demanded, his polished corporate demeanor cracking under pressure. We can't find the proper connection points, she admitted. The substation was modified in 2002 during the downtown expansion. The grounding system is non-standard. We try one configuration, and it shorts out. The AI can't help because it doesn't recognize the custom set. Call every retired utilities worker, until you find someone who knows that substation, the mayor ordered. We've been trying, Dr. Patel. The engineer said, there's really only one person who would know every detail. She didn't need to say the name. Outside, the storm intensified. Reports came in of flooding in the eastern neighborhoods. The hospital had switched to backup generators, but those had limited capacity. The fire department radioed that without power to pump stations, their ability to fight fires would be severely compromised within hours. At 9:47, Mayor Langston made his decision. Against Darren's protests, he gathered what they had: a partial blueprint, a city vehicle, and his executive authority, and drove through the storm-lashed streets to a small bungalow on the outskirts of town. Walter Kent was sitting on his covered porch, watching the storm by the light of an old battery-powered lantern. He wasn't surprised when the city vehicle pulled into his driveway. He'd been expecting someone since the first flicker of his own lights 3 hours early. What did surprise him was seeing the mayor himself emerge from the passenger seat, clutching a plastic-wrapped bundle of papers. As rain pelted down, Mayor Langston approached the porch, and then in a gesture that would soon be captured by the driver's phone camera, and shared thousands of times online, he knelt on the wet walkway. Walter, he said, his voice barely audible above the wind, we were wrong. The city needs you. Walter said nothing, his weathered face illuminated by the lantern's glow. Mayor Langston held out the soggy blueprints, incomplete copies of the originals that Walter had maintained for decades. The Grant Street substation is down. The hospital has maybe 4 hours of generator power left. We can't figure out the grounding configuration you installed. Walter took the papers, unfolded them carefully, and studied them for precisely 10 seconds. Then he pointed to a specific junction. Your new system linked the underground bypass to the wrong grounding point, he said matter-of-factly. It's not the AI that's failing. It's that whoever installed it didn't understand how the old system was balanced. He stood up and reached for his old work coat, hanging by the door. I'll come, not for recognition, not for the city administration, but because there are people in that hospital who need electricity to survive. Within 30 minutes, Walter was at the Grant Street substation. The technical team that greeted him included faces he recognized, and many he did. All of them, even Darren, especially Darren, watched in respectful silence as the old electrician oriented himself among the machinery he had once known as intimately as his own home. Walter pulled a broken pencil stub from his pocket, a habit so ingrained he'd carried it even in retirement, and began issuing clear, concise directions. His hands moved with practiced precision, identifying connection points, and explaining the logic behind the custom configuration he'd implemented years ago. The downtown grid was overloading during peak hours, he explained as he worked. We couldn't get approval for a full upgrade, so we created a bypass system that redistributed load during emergencies. It's not in any official blueprint, because it was supposed to be temporary, but it worked so well, we kept it. A young engineer recorded Walter's every move on a tablet, creating the documentation that should have existed all along. Behind them, a group of firefighters waited in their rain gear, understanding that their ability to save lives that night depended entirely on this elderly man's knowledge. At 11:03 p.m.,
The Grant Street substation hummed back to life. Lights began to return across Briarfield, grid section by grid section. The hospital reported stable power. The emergency services radio crackled with confirmed restorations throughout the city center. Walter stood back, watching the familiar transformation of darkness into light. He said nothing, as the mayor clapped him on the shoulder, as Darren awkwardly extended his hand in gratitude, as the firefighters saluted before rushing back to their waiting emergency. By morning, as the storm cleared, a photo had begun circulating on social media. An elderly man in a worn work coat consulting a rain-soaked blueprint by flashlight, while surrounded by younger technicians. The caption, written by the engineer who had recorded his work, read simply, "The old man with hand-drawn maps just saved our city from darkness." 1 week after the storm, Briarfield City Council convened a special session to formally recognize Walter Davison's contribution. They prepared a proclamation, arranged for news coverage, and planned a speech that the mayor would deliver, before presenting Walter with a commemorative plaque. Walter accepted the invitation, but made one request: no speeches, especially not from him. When the moment came, Walter stood uncomfortably at the podium as the mayor read a brief statement, acknowledging his 30 years of service and his crucial role during the recent crisis. The council chambers erupted in applause, but Walter raised his hand for quiet. "I only have one request," he said, his voice soft yet caring to every corner of the room. "I'd like the original electrical grid maps hung in the technical department, so someone might remember there was once a person who drew them by hand." His words, simple and without self-promotion, resonated more powerfully than any elaborate speech could have. The council approved his request unanimously. The following day, Walter returned to the utilities department, not as an employee, but as a consultant. The framed original blueprints now held a place of honor on the main wall, protected behind glass but accessible for reference. More significantly, a new training program began. Young technicians who had grown up in the digital age gathered around Walter as he explained the physical realities behind the abstract diagrams on their tablet. He showed them how to trace wires with their fingers, how to listen for the subtle sounds that indicated potential failures, and how to think beyond the schematics to understand the system as a living entity. A young female engineer with multiple advanced degrees stayed after one session. "Why didn't you ever teach at the technical college?" she asked. "You explained these concepts more clearly than any of my professors did." Walter smiled. "Because I never had a degree myself. I learned from the man who kept the city's lights on for 30 years before me." This revelation surprised her. "But you design modifications to complex electrical systems." "Experience," Walter shrugged. "When you've seen a system fail 100 different ways, you learn 100 different solutions." The utilities department underwent subtle but significant change. Darren remained as manager, but his approach shifted. The advanced AI system was still central to operations, but it was now supplemented by regular physical inspections and handwritten notes. A new sign appeared in the technical department: Kent Standard Wiring, the gold standard. The city's digitization continued, but with greater respect for the institutional knowledge that couldn't be easily captured in ones and zeros. Junior technicians were paired with veterans, creating mentorship relationships that preserved critical insight. 1 month after the storm, a group of elementary school students visited the utilities department on a field trip. They marveled at the screens and digital displays, but also at the framed maps with their handwritten notations. A small boy approached Walter, who was helping that. "Did you draw all those maps?" he asked, eyes wide. "Many of them," Walter acknowledged. "Over many years." The boy offered him a brand new notebook with a lightning bolt on the cover. "You should keep writing stuff down," he said solemnly. "Next time, we'll read." Walter accepted the gift with equal seriousness, understanding its significance. The city's future would be digital, but its past and present still needed human hands to guide the transition. Major Langston made a point of having coffee with Walter once a month. During one such meeting, he asked the question that had been on his mind since the night of the storm: "Why did you come back? After how the city treated you, I wouldn't have blamed you for refusing." Walter considered this for a moment. "When I was 20, my first supervisor told me something I never forgot," he said. "The work we do isn't for bosses or paychecks or recognition. It's for the people who need light when they flip a switch." He stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "I didn't come back for the administration. I came back for the patient, on life support, for the child afraid of the dark, for the elderly couple who needed their heat to work. The same reason I showed up every day for 30 years. As Briarfield moved forward with its smart city initiatives, a new plaque appeared in the control center. Beside all the cutting-edge technology, it displayed a simple quote: "Technology evolves, but electricity still needs a path home." Below it, In smaller letters, the Kent principal. Walter never returned as a full-time employee. He had no desire to navigate office politics or relearn systems that would soon be outdated again. Instead, he became something perhaps more valuable, a bridge between generations, between analog and digital, between the physical infrastructure, beneath the streets, and the abstract representations on screen. Children in Briarfield schools now learned about electrical systems through a program called How Does Your City Work? When they asked who kept the lights on, they learned about both the advanced AI system and the human hands that still sometimes needed to guide it. Walter's legacy wasn't a statue in the town square, or his name on a municipal building. It was in the lights that stayed on during the next storm, and in the young technicians, who knew that sometimes the most important tool wasn't a tablet or smartphone, but the knowledge carried by those who came before them. Some people don't need titles to make an impact. They just need a blueprint, and a city brave enough to bow its head. That evening, as Walter sat beneath the warm glow of a street lamp, now powered by the very system he'd helped preserve, he watched families return to lit homes, unaware of how close darkness had crept. He didn't need the flick of every switch, the hum of every refrigerator, and the gentle warmth in every room was the only thanks he ever wanted. Some men build legacies, not in headlines, but in quiet circuits of care. You may forget this story in a few days, but if nobody retells it, history will remain silent forever. Subscribe to Incredible Stories, where justice, kindness, and memory are protected until the end.